This research looks to examine urban Indigenous parents and carers' experiences of their child's primary school education. Across all socio-economic indicators, Indigenous Australians are the most disadvantaged group in this country. Importantly, Indigenous educational outcomes are lower across all measures than that of non-Indigenous Australians, and educational success predicts employment, social and housing success for all Australians, including Indigenous Australians. Educational engagement for Indigenous students is lower overall than that of non-Indigenous students. Research has shown that connection to land and spirituality is a protective factor for the mental health outcomes of Indigenous students. However, this can lead to higher degrees of absenteeism amongst Indigenous students, as families will often travel back to country to participate in particular ceremonies or important family events. Ongoing intergenerational trauma can affect students' engagement with education, and this can be caused through a loss of culture and identity over time. Research in this field can be tricky. Cultural attitudes to education systems can be compounded by intergenerational trauma or poor educational engagement of the parents and carers. Language barriers, including the acceptance of Aboriginal English as a dialect, can also be something that needs navigating. The use of appropriate diagnostic tools in psychology research needs to be considered. And the recruitment of participants in any kind of research, which is built through rapport and trust, needs to have a broader understanding. Our aim is to conduct qualitative research. This is because through conversation, richer data can be borne out through meaningful connections. Qualitative research emphasises the importance of context and allows for the co-construction of the research with the participant. It identifies and embraces the possibility of multiple ways of experiencing the world and also emphasises that we understand our world through the mediation of our own values. Qualitative research relies on far fewer data points to develop research, so there's no emphasis on large-scale recruitment. This research will use discourse analysis. Discourse analysis privileges the voice of the participant and allows the research to move in directions that recognise and also prioritise the worldview of the participant. It looks at the way, in particular, in which language is used by people to make sense of their world. Also, there is no requirement for a large data set. Research can be conducted with one person or a few people through a semi-structured or unstructured interview format. There are several difficulties that may arise with this research, including recruitment, language, using a culturally sensitive interview format, and the consideration that supervision by an Indigenous Australian may be warranted and appropriate. Recent research has looked at best practices in Indigenous education and also the idea of self-concept, school motivation and cultural perspectives amongst Indigenous students. Hay, Wright et al. Identified that the parent-child connectedness was an indicator of educational success. My research has shown only one discourse analytic approach, in particular the study by Searle and Mulholland called Negotiating Whiteness. However, this discourse analysis was undertaken with non-Indigenous Australians who were working with Indigenous Australians. There is obviously an understanding that there is need for research in this field. Craven, Ryan et al. Have established a proposal for a reciprocal research partnership which incorporates positive psychology principles with an Indigenous Australian worldview. Madden in 2015 noted that pedagogical considerations have always been from the educator's point of view and not from the students or the Indigenous communities. To date, most research in this field of educational research amongst Indigenous Australians has been quantitative. Very little qualitative research has been done. We seek to look at the differences between Western and Indigenous ideas of education, in particular, what it means to be successful within that framework. We believe that the analysis and understanding of Indigenous values in education is limited, and that most educational interventions for Indigenous students have been based on the prevailing Western ideas about how schooling should work. In particular, the question of why we concentrate here on the parents and carers, that is because it is overwhelmingly they who determine a primary school child's access to and experience with education. The development of our research question has taken numerous steps, including that the current education system set up in the Western tradition does not take Indigenous values into account, that all markers of success in the education system are based on Western ideals and markers, and that examining Indigenous people's experience of the education system should be through examining their lived experience. This has led to our research question of how do urban Indigenous parents and carers use language to manage and negotiate their relationships with the education system. Our research project will begin with the recruitment of participants through a network and include semi-structured or unstructured interviews. A discourse analysis will then take place, and then finally an identification of the wider social functions and consequences that these strategies serve will be investigated.